the 2019 Bajaj Dominar. It's finally the bike that got us all excited at Auto Expo 2014. In this new upgrade, it gets better hardware, more features, and the promise of more performance as well. And let's not forget, the Dominar has always been the benchmark when it came to value for money, because no other bike in this price bracket offers as much performance and as many features. So the question to ask is, just how does it perform in the real world? And also, what happens if you stack it up against its more expensive competition? This new Dominar makes a full 5 PS more than the previous bike. So how much of a difference does it make in performance? Well, in the run to 60, this is 0.3 seconds quicker compared to the older bike. But more importantly, in the run to 100, it's a full second quicker. And it now sounds much nicer too, with a lot more bass in the exhaust note. And also, thanks to the DOHC setup, the bike just loves to rev. Open the throttle and it's gonna pick up speed really quickly, and it is a fair amount of fun in a straight line. But with this new update, the Dominar's power figure is actually within spitting distance of the 390 Dukes, just 3.5 PS less. But the Dominar is still 21 kilos heavier. Now it doesn't make a huge difference in the run to 60, just a quarter of a second slower. But in the run to 100, this Duke is a whole 1.5 seconds quicker. Well, that's what you get with the best power to weight ratio in class. Sure, in outright acceleration, this Dominar isn't as quick as the Duke. But then again, it was never meant to be. Where it matters, this Dominar does deliver. If you factor in in-gear roll-on acceleration, it's pretty much on par with the Duke. You can carry decently low speeds in higher gears. In fact, in most conditions, you'll actually be carrying 1 gear higher on the Dominar than you would be on the Duke. And then when you combine that with the super light clutch action and that butter smooth 6-speed gearbox, you have an engine that can make short work of any city commute. I will say one thing though, I just wish the throttle was a little bit lighter as well. With more power, you do get a slight drop in fuel efficiency compared to the older Dominar. But even then, in the city, efficiency is pretty much on par with the Duke as well as the Interceptor. But on the highway, the Dominar puts out a lot better efficiency compared to those two bikes. So even though this tank is slightly smaller than the tanks on those two bikes, it has actually longer highway legs. So while the Dominar's motor works really well in the city, there is a bit of a problem, and that is this bike's weight. It's fairly heavy and you feel it pretty much all of the time. Heck, even the steering feels fairly heavy at slow speeds. And when it starts going into one direction, you have to really muscle it to get it back in the right direction. Now this is going to be especially troublesome for shorter riders because the bars do require a bit of stretch to reach them. And then even the range of the steering movement isn't all that great, which means if you want to find your way through a traffic jam, it's going to take some effort. And if you want to take a U-turn, well, that's going to be a 3-point turn. And while the seat height itself is quite low, because of the width of the bike, it pushes your legs further out. So shorter riders will still have to stretch to get their feet on the ground. This is also a concern on the Interceptor, but not on the Duke, which actually has the tallest seat height amongst these three. In one word, yes. And that's because this motor is a lot more refined than before. There are barely any vibes to speak of. Yes, you do get a slight tingle in the handlebars, but honestly, it's not much of a deal breaker. And now with the extra performance, this bike can actually maintain higher cruising speeds on the highway. Doing 120, 130 on the highway, Dominar will do it, no questions asked. And there's enough power in reserve to do overtakes at those speeds without having to downshift. But these higher highway speeds means there are some new problems, because at that point you do feel a distinct lack of wind protection. I think it's high time that Bajaj offered some proper touring accessories such as a taller windshield and something more than these luggage straps to put on your luggage. But then the question is, does it do better on the highway than the Interceptor? Well, motor-wise, not really. The Interceptor's parallel twin motor is actually more refined than the Dominar single-cylinder engine. So in 2019, you have a Royal Enfield that's actually smoother than a Bajaj. Surprise, surprise, how things have changed. And even doing those same triple-digit speeds is a little bit easier on the Interceptor. Now, the one area where the Dominar is a lot better than the Interceptor is when it comes to the seat. Now, this rider's seat is actually fairly wide and it's very plush. So overall, I would rate it very high on comfort. And even the handlebars, they give you a fairly upright riding position, which means over long journeys, you won't be putting too much pressure on your wrists. Even the foot pegs, they are rear set, but not that much. So overall, if you're doing a long stint on the highway, you won't end up very tired. And when it comes to the pillion seat, well, it is fairly decently sized and it's actually fairly alright for pillion riders. More importantly, the pillion foot pegs, they aren't set very high, unlike the Interceptor where you sit fairly knees up at the back. So I guess pillions are not going to have too much of a trouble if you're going to take them for a long ride. But all these aspects actually haven't changed from the previous Dominar. It's all the same. What has changed is that rear shock. Now the ride at the rear on the old Dominar, there's only one word. It was extremely harsh. This one is significantly better. It handles bad roads fairly well. However, if you show it some very sharp bumps, it does give you a jhatka at your back. But as long as you avoid those sharp bumps, you shouldn't have any problems when it comes to comfort. Now, thanks to those beefy upside down forks up front, the Dominar's handling has definitely improved. The bike turns in fairly quickly, but because you're sitting so far back on the bike and there's not much weight on the front end does feel a little bit vague in the corners. And the bike also feels fairly top heavy. So once you turn into a corner, the weight kind of drops into it, which is fine for a single corner, but if you want to pick it up for another corner, it does take a bit of effort. On long sweeping corners, the Dominar feels just fine and is plenty stable. But for fast switchbacks, not the best bike. It's not going to give you those Duke levels of handling. Thanks to the new braking hardware, braking performance has now actually gone up. The bike now stops better than before and it stops almost as well as the current generation 390 Duke. But in terms of feel, the brakes will definitely remind you of the last generation 390 because the feel at the lever is very spongy. In terms of features, there is not a huge change over the previous Dominar. The instrument cluster's layout has changed slightly and now gets a fuel efficiency indicator as well as a distance to empty gauge. The tank-mounted secondary instrument panel does look cool. But looking at it while riding needs you to tilt your head down, completely taking your eyes off the road. Overall though, the small design tweaks make this bike look better than before. And the upside down forks add a lot of chunkiness to the front design, making the Dominar look more premium and more intimidating than before. Now the Dominar will check a lot of boxes for a lot of people. It is very good on the highway, it's quite decent in the corners and it's not too bad in the city either. So in that sense, it's a very versatile motorcycle, and it's always been a great value for money. And in this new package, it's better in every conceivable way. So actually, it's now even better value for money. So the Dominar is a very sensible motorcycle. But who said motorcycles have to be all about sense? So would I recommend Dominar? If I was speaking from my head, definitely. But if I was speaking from my heart, I would say increase your budget.